Welcome to this deep dive.
Yeah.
And we're going to unpack some pretty heavy ideas about sexuality and how we think about sex in Western society.
Yeah.
So specifically, we're exploring the shift from what the author of The History of Sexuality calls ars erotica to Scientia Sexualis.
I see.
Yeah. Have you ever thought about how we went from societies that treated sexual knowledge as a secret, almost sacred art form, to ones that demand confession and scientific scrutiny?
Yeah, no, it's a
pretty wild transition when you think about it.
It is a wild transition.
Yeah.
Really, really wild.
It's like the rules of the game totally change.
Yeah, and what's so fascinating is it's not just about changing attitudes over time, but kind of a fundamental shift in how we understand and experience sexuality at its core.
Absolutely.
Like the rules of the game.
Yeah, so in The History of Sexuality,
the author starts by describing this earlier model of ars erotica, where sexual knowledge was carefully guarded and passed down through like initiation and practice, almost like a secret society.
Yes.
Which is so different.
It's very different.
From the way we think about it today.
It really is a stark contrast. Yeah. And what makes it even more complex, I think, is that the transition to Scientia Sexualis wasn't a clean break.
Okay.
You know, this new scientific model actually adopted and adapted some of the confessional techniques of the ars erotica.
Interesting.
So we're not talking about a simple replacement here, but an intricate weaving together of pleasure and knowledge and control.
That's a really good point. It's like they took the tools of secrecy and intimacy and repurposed them for examination and control.
Yes. And the author even argues that
this shift to Scientia Sexualis, with its emphasis on confession and categorization, may have intensified our focus on sex, leading to new forms of control, rather than the liberation we might expect.
You'd think that bringing things out in the open
you would think
would make us more free.
Exactly.
But it sounds like maybe it had the opposite effect.
That's one of the central paradoxes, I think, that the author is exploring here.
Yeah.
Did our pursuit of knowledge about sex actually trap us in a more complex web of power dynamics? It makes you question some assumptions about
it totally does.
Progress and liberation, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really makes me think like, what exactly is Scientia Sexualis? Is it just another word for like sex education as we know it?
It's more than that.
Okay.
The author is using Scientia Sexualis to describe this entirely new scientific approach to understanding sexuality that emerged in Western society.
Okay.
And it aims to classify and explain everything about sex.
Wow.
Behaviors, desires, and anything deemed a deviation from the norm.
Right.
And to do this, they developed these very specific techniques for studying and controlling sexuality.
So it's less about education and more about analysis and control.
It is.
Okay.
Think of it this way.
Okay.
The author highlights 4 key techniques that are used in this model.
Okay.
Clinical codification, general causality, the inquisition principle, and interpretation.
Got it.
So clinical codification involves creating these very specific categories for sexual behaviors, almost like a taxonomy of sex.
So instead of seeing sexuality on a spectrum, they were drawing very distinct lines.
Exactly.
Got it.
And this feeds into the next technique, general causality, which is this idea that everything has an underlying cause. It's often rooted in biological or psychological factors.
Interesting.
So instead of simply observing a behavior, they were trying to diagnose it and explain it.
It feels like they were trying to apply a rigid scientific framework to something that's inherently personal.
That's a really good observation.
Yeah.
And it speaks to the tension that the author is highlighting.
Yeah.
Can you truly capture the complexity of human sexuality in a neat little scientific box?
Yeah.
And then there's the inquisition principle, which involves this relentless questioning and investigation of people's sexual thoughts and actions.
So not only were they categorizing and diagnosing, but they were actively interrogating people about their private lives.
Yeah, it's a little unsettling.
It is a bit unsettling.
And finally, there's interpretation, where these so-called experts would analyze and decode people's confessions, whether given in a religious, medical,
or therapeutic context, to uncover hidden meanings and motivations.
It's like they were trying to create a science out of something that's deeply personal and often very private.
And that's where the lines between knowledge, pleasure, and control become really blurry.
Yeah.
The author even suggests that Scientia Sexualis might be a form of ars erotica in disguise.
Hold on. So they're saying that this scientific approach to sex could actually be a kind of secret, pleasurable knowledge.
It's a great question. How does that even work?
And it's something we should unpack a little further.
Yeah.
You know, remember we talked about how scientific model adopted those confessional techniques from the ars erotica?
Right.
So perhaps in trying to control and understand sex, Scientia Sexualis, unintentionally created its own form of erotic knowledge.
So it's like they were so focused on analyzing and controlling sex.
That they inadvertently created a new kind of eroticism, one built on the very systems of power that they were trying to establish.
That's a very insightful way to put it.
Wow.
And it really raises the question of whether our modern obsession with, talking about analyzing, categorizing sex, might actually be feeding this Scientia Sexualis as a new form of ars erotica.
So instead of achieving liberation, we might just be participating in a different, more complex system of erotic knowledge and control.
It really makes you think, doesn't it?
Mind-blowing.
Have we truly moved beyond the secrecy and control of the ars erotica?
Right.
Or have we simply shifted the power dynamics in a way that's harder to recognize?
Yeah.
It's something worth pondering.
For sure.
As we dive deeper into the author's ideas.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's a head-spinning thought, right?
Yeah.
And this idea of Scientia Sexualis as this disguised form of ars erotica really challenges us to examine our own relationship with knowledge and control when it comes to sex.
Yeah, I'm still grappling with it, to be honest. But I'm curious, does the author offer any, solutions?
That's a really important question.
Yeah.
And surprisingly, the author doesn't offer a clear-cut solution.
Yeah.
They're more focused on helping us see the problem, understand how we got here, and question the assumptions that we often take for granted.
So it's less about giving us the answers and more about prompting us to think critically about the whole system.
I think so too.
Which is actually a very powerful approach.
It is. It empowers us to become active participants in shaping our own understanding of sexuality rather than passively accepting these dominant narratives.
Okay, so if Scientia Sexualis isn't the answer, where do we go from here?
How do we create
the author
a more liberated and fulfilling sexual discourse?
That we might be able to learn something valuable from the ars erotica model. Remember, the emphasis there was on experience, its initiation, and the passing down of knowledge through practice. It was a much more...
Yeah, that makes me think about how so much of our modern understanding of sex comes from textbooks and therapy sessions and online articles.
Exactly.
All very heady and analytical.
It is very heady. It's all in our heads.
Maybe we need to reclaim the personal and experiential aspects of sex.
I think that's a brilliant insight.
Yeah.
It's about finding a balance between knowledge and experience, between individual expression and social responsibility.
Because ultimately, sex isn't just a set of facts or categories.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a fundamental part of being human.
It's about connection and pleasure and vulnerability of these messy, complicated things that can't be fully captured.
It can't be captured in a box.
That's Scientia Sexualis.
No.
Yeah.
And perhaps by acknowledging those complexities, by embracing the nuances and contradictions of human sexuality, we can start to move towards.
Yeah, it feels like we've been talking about Scientia Sexualis in a pretty negative light.
Sure.
But didn't this scientific approach also bring about...
That's a fair point.
...some positive changes?
Yeah, and it's important to acknowledge that the shift towards a more scientific understanding of sex did have some positive consequences.
Yeah.
For example, it helped to challenge some harmful myths and misconceptions about sexuality.
Right.
And it's certainly played a role in advancing our understanding of sexual health and reproduction.
So it's not a simple...
It's not black and white
situation.
No.
There were both benefits and drawbacks.
Exactly.
To this shift in thinking about sex.
And that's why it's so important to engage in nuanced and critical thinking about these issues. It's not about demonizing science or rejecting knowledge altogether. It's about understanding the limitations of any single approach and being aware of the potential.
It's like that saying, with great power comes great responsibility.
Exactly.
We need to be mindful of how knowledge about sex can be used for both good and for ill.
Precisely. And the author's work reminds us that we all have a role to play in shaping the discourse around sexuality.
Right.
We can choose to be critical thinkers, to question the truths that we've been told and advocate for.
Okay, this whole conversation has really opened my eyes to the complexities of sexual discourse.
Absolutely.
What are some of the key takeaways that have stood out to you?
It's this realization that our understanding of sexuality isn't static.
Right.
It's constantly evolving.
Yeah.
And that evolution is shaped by a variety of forces, including power knowledge.
And that we have a responsibility
social norms
to be aware of those forces, right?
Yes.
To engage in critical dialogue about how we want to understand and experience sexuality.
Absolutely.
Both individually and as a society.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's about questioning the status quo, challenging assumptions, and working towards a more inclusive and liberating understanding of sex.
Got it.
And it's about recognizing that this is an ongoing conversation, one that requires constant reflection and engagement. It really is an ongoing conversation. And a complex one at that.
Yeah, it really is.
Makes you realize there's so many layers to how we think and talk about sex.
It's like we've been peeling back the layers of an onion this whole time.
Yeah.
And just when you think you've reached the core, there's another layer underneath.
That's a perfect analogy.
Yeah.
And speaking of layers, there's one more point I think the author makes that I think we should unpack a little bit.
Okay.
They suggest that even though Scientia Sexualis aimed to control and regulate sexuality, it might have inadvertently unleashed something that it couldn't fully contain.
I'm intrigued. What do you mean by that?
So, you know how we talked about Scientia Sexualis potentially being a form of eros erotica in disguise?
Yeah.
The author argues that by bringing sexuality into the realm of public discourse, by constantly analyzing it and categorizing it, Scientia Sexualis may have actually amplified the very desires
it sought to control.
They shone a spotlight on sexuality.
Exactly.
In doing so, they made it even more
alluring and intriguing.
It's like the forbidden fruit effect.
Right.
The more we try to suppress or control something, the more it seems to captivate our attention.
And the author is suggesting that this might be happening on a societal level with Scientia Sexualis.
That's the idea.
That by trying to define and categorize every aspect of sex, we've actually created a more pervasive and stimulating sexual culture.
It's a bit paradoxical, isn't it?
It really is.
The very systems of control that were meant to regulate sexuality might have unintentionally fueled.
It's like they built a dam to hold back the river.
What a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And this leads to a really important question for us to consider. Has our shift from ars erotica to Scientia Sexualis truly brought us liberation?
Right.
Or have we simply traded one form of eroticism?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
It seems like there's no easy answer.
It's not easy.
We've gained a lot in terms of knowledge and understanding.
Right.
But we may have also lost something in the process.
Impossible.
Maybe some of the mystery, the intimacy, the personal exploration that characterized ars erotica.
You've hit the nail on the head. It's about finding that balance.
Okay.
How do we embrace knowledge and understanding without sacrificing the personal and experiential aspects of sexuality?
How do we create a sexual culture that is both informed and liberating, both responsible and pleasurable?
Those are powerful questions to ponder.
And I think they're questions that each of us needs to wrestle with on a personal level as well.
Yeah.
How has my own understanding of sexuality been shaped by these forces?
What's truly liberated and fulfilling sexual discourse look like to me?
Yeah. This whole deep dive has really been a journey.
It has.
You know, we've gone from ancient confessionals to modern therapy couches, from secret societies to scientific journals.
Right.
And what's striking to me is that even though the language and the methods have changed, these core questions about sex, power, and knowledge remain remarkably consistent.
They're timeless human concerns.
Yeah, it's a reminder that these are timeless human concerns.
Right.
And that the conversation about sexuality is one that will likely continue to evolve and challenge us for generations to come.
It's an ongoing exploration.
Yeah.
A process of discovery.
Yeah, and even though there may not be easy answers,
right,
the act of questioning, of engaging in thoughtful dialogue is itself a form of liberation.
I couldn't agree more.
So for all of you listening out there, we leave you with this.
Yes.
How has your own understanding of sexuality been shaped by these forces of Ars Erotica and Scientia Sexualis?
No.
And what would a truly liberated and fulfilling sexual discourse look like to you?
Yeah.
Keep those questions in mind.
Keep the conversation going.
Keep the conversation going. And until next time.
Until next time.
Keep diving deep.